Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Southampton, part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. Today, I am your host, Zach Finch. I am joined by Oscar. How you doing, bud?
Yeah, all good, thanks. All good.
We had a pretty busy week last week. I didn't manage to catch you in any of the episodes because we had a lot of weird crossover, but it was just it's a pretty hectic week. Relegation finally confirmed. Juric out the door. Ruskin, Lallana as assistant. There were lots on the cards for it to be a new manager bounce or something a bit exciting. But alas, we were beat by Villa 3-0. And I want to start by pointing out how I have consistently and seem to consistently underestimate Aston Villa. This is like a personal thing, right? Where I think that, like, in my head, they're still that team that came up from the Championship like a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And they're just not that team anymore. And I think that we'll get into it as we go on, but their subs bench kind of proved that they are just not that team anymore. We are miles. The gulf between us and teams like Villa are just so massive. And that was kind of proven. So I guess we'll start from the start, right? So if you had a chance to sort of look at the lineups, anything kind of there jump out at you a little bit? We finally got the Archer tool pool we've always asked for. However, it just kind of felt like it wasn't the game for it.
No.
They didn't get to do anything, to be honest. So, yeah, how did you feel about the lineup anyway?
No, I think it's almost like one of those where maybe if it's something that a lot of fans have been screaming for, it's a bit if they've tried to placate it. But yeah, it's a difficult one to judge. I agree with you. Like Villa for me, I think was always going to be far too much for us. I think we'd lose 2-1. I think, the quality they've got, if you can bring on, in England, all right, he's not a starter, but an England squad player off the bench, a striker, what would we give to have a striker like Watkins as our main player? I know they're resting and rotating, but their second 11 is by far and away stronger than our best. The best 11 we can put out. So, I'm not massively surprised. Is that the game to try, 2 strikers? Maybe not. I mean, it seemed like we were a bit more solid, right?
But I don't know if that was because the back five all had players that actually play centre back and left back and right back. Like having P players play in their actual position meant that we were solid, and we were solid for 75 minutes. We didn't really look like there was going to be much, and obviously it all went downhill. But it really was a tale of Villa's substitutes, because literally all 3 goals were scored by their substitutes. There were obviously some incredible heroics from Aaron Ramsdale, and I feel really bad for that sort of the follow-up goal from the penalty the second time round, because I think that they could have done better. But it's like when we're bringing on Ross Stewart, who has been out since October, and they're bringing on Ollie Watkins and Asensio, it's kind of like, what are we, it's just a completely different.
And it's happened a few times. Like, we've got a massive squad, but actually outside of the first 11, very little. It's just very little quality. Probably the word's more very little Premier League quality, and we get and Russell Martin I think mentioned it, and maybe Juric as well. We get worse when we make subs, and it was very evident in the Palace game. It was very evident yesterday. It was the first goal after we'd made our subs, I believe, and Small Bones just coming back from injury. Ross Stewart's just coming back from injury. Is that the time to throw them into a game again? Like, obviously, I'm not criticising Ruskin Lallana. They've been given an impossible job. I wonder what the reception would have been if that had been Juric that had done that.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree.
But it's just it goes. I mentioned it to Greg last week. It shows how far we have come from a couple of years ago when we were around the same point with Villa, when they sacked Gerrard. Was it Gerrard or Paul Lambert or one or the other? I think it was Gerrard. They sacked Gerrard and we sacked Hasenhüttl, and we've just since then gone completely different directions. And that's not a dig at like our owners or saying we should have just gone out and got Unai Emery. Like, it's obviously not as simple as that. We are not Aston Villa. We're not as big a club.
I feel like getting Nathan Jones though. That wasn't. No. That was. We are trying to stay in the Premier League. we've been in the Premier League solidly for years. We decided to bring in a Championship manager from Luton. Luton did get promoted that season, but Luton currently aren't, and they're on their way down potentially to League One again. But like when you hear we are replacing this Premier League manager, who he's lost a couple of 9-0s, and but also had that one win against Liverpool that he cried at, whatever. The problem is that when you are then replacing him because his position has become untenable, and the best that you can come up with is like a guy from the Championship who immediately rattled everybody. What do you expect? And then since then, it's just been, a lot of things. And as you pointed out, though, it's just the gulf between the two of the teams is just absolutely immense. And that was completely,
it's interesting
confounded on the pitch.
If they come out and say there's anything they've learned from this, because it is almost identical parallels from the last relegation. We sacked a manager that it wasn't necessarily universally popular that he'd been sacked at the time. And now the question that's, rising all around is, was it the right decision? To sack Casanuto in the first place, to sack Martin in the first place. Like, I think, again, with both situations, ultimately, they'd lost the fans. So it was the right decision. It's just the recruitment hasn't been good enough in terms of who they've brought in.
It's interesting that although they've lost the fans, we're one of the few teams that have kind of stuck with that philosophy, because you look at Tottenham keeping Postecoglou, you look at Manchester United keeping Amorim, and that is a situation where I think a lot of the fans have turned quite quickly on those, especially with Spurs. Obviously, it'll be very, very different once we end up with the results of the Europa League, right? Like if they end up losing, getting knocked out, then I think probably, to be honest, at that point, Ange will probably leave and wants to leave. But it's interesting that, like, with our situation, I said to Greg, like, my thoughts on it was kind of like, what was the point? And Greg was like, oh, we had to go through that journey. I'm like, did we? Like, because it kind of feels like you're right, we did exactly what we did relegation season, except we just did it a bit later, which meant that we also lost the entire January transfer window. But then there were, some of that Russell Martin interview was very interesting, where bits and pieces coming out, like, the fact that the club said relegation was a foregone conclusion. And you're like, well, what was the point of wasting all of the money on bit players then? You may as well have just kept exactly the same squad and added, like, Ramsdale. And then, it wouldn't have been much better. But also you wouldn't have lost all this money on players that aren't going to stick around. There's just you're right. There's not a lot of faith, and they're struggling to return that faith. And I don't know whether Roll's the answer. I don't know if Steve Cooper's the answer. I don't know what the answer is, but nothing had laid bare the problems that we have more than that Villa game, because it shows you with a completely different set of managers, and they went for 5 at the back again, and they tried to play 2 strikers, but we got 75 minutes in, we stuck in a lot longer than we usually would, but then the scoreline once again didn't really reflect. It shouldn't have been 3-0.
No.
What are you going to do? That's just the way that we've been. And I just want to correct myself. Asensio started. He didn't come on as a substitute. Malin came on, and all 3 substitutes managed to get goals. And as you said, with us, like, the most exciting substitute we had was probably Tyler Dibbling, and that's the one that everyone's really, really hyped about. And then he's also getting a lot of flack for supposedly downing tools since Martin's come in. It's probably just that I think a lot of the players around him, you can only do so. How you imagine what the mentality of being told that you're worth £100 million in the season you first broken into the Premier League, in probably the worst Premier League campaign in history, potentially ever. It's got to do a lot to you getting messed up in the head after a while. Like, I don't think from a psychological perspective, I personally could take it. I know Greg's cooking some stuff in the background about this kind of thing, but that's the problem, is that we can talk about the team sheet over and over, but, like, ultimately the players that played, as you said, the starting 11, there wasn't really, who are you going to bring on? Who are the players that are going to make the difference out of all of the players we had on the bench? And the answer is none of them, really. And you're right, and that's the problem. And our best 11 is ultimately the entirety of our squad, and we don't really even know if our best 11 is our best 11. Realistically, we've got a couple of Premier League quality players, and the rest of them aren't. And that's just the harsh reality of it. But I don't know, we'll get into the game, have a little bit of a conversation about what was essentially me being stressed for 75 minutes until finally they scored. Because at least that way you're put out of the misery of, we might actually make it 0-0 here. Once we've heard from our partners at Bioniq.
Your body is unique, and Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq. the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements, designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now. Your body is unique. And Global Sports.
And we are back. So, yeah, obviously, it couldn't have been like, I don't know, as I said, I think I just consistently underestimate Aston Villa, and that's entirely on me. So I had a 2-1 win. Greg always has some sort of ridiculous win planned. You were the only realistic one out of us. And I think it's kind of disappointing we weren't even able to peg back nothing, but we struggled to create against a team of that quality. And yeah, it was a hard match to watch. And then obviously once we gave away the penalty, it was kind of like, oh, here it is. I just assumed that they were going to score it. The fact we saved it stunned me. But then that concentration was lapsed enough that they scored. And then, the rest is history. Another 2 goals piled on the end. Poor Ramsdale, he's thrown in some fantastic performances. I think, it must be frustrating. And I feel bad for Jan Bednarek, whose it was his birthday, his 250th appearance, and what has he done? He gave away a penalty, and
it's a tricky one with him. Like, I know he's been getting a lot of love recently, and people have been mentioning him, saying, is it going to be a similar situation to Romeo, that we don't realise quite how valuable he was until he goes. Which, and to be fair, ironically against Villa as well, considering the whole situation that happened with that. I never thought he'd come back from that, if I'm honest. I think giving your own fans grief and turning on them is, especially in modern day, is tough. I know Kelvin Davis did it back in the day, and he's still held as, at least in our eyes, he's a club legend. But fair play to him, and like he's been given, he's been given a bad run of it recently as well, and not necessarily in terms of what he's been doing, but just the players around him. And yeah, it's a tricky one. And I know when we did the buy, sell, keep, or sell, keep, release, or bench, whatever, that he's one that I would have said it was probably time to move on. And that's not actually a criticism of him. That is do you know what? He's done his stint. It's just, I think, time to move on for everyone now, and time to sort of try and rebuild. But I don't think you can blame it on him. And, again, even Jack Stevens, look, we know he at times isn't Premier League quality. Like, I think he can fit in, and he can be a bit part player in it. Is he someone we need to be relying on? Probably not. He's a bit rash. But he offers something that we lack when he isn't playing. We just aren't good enough. And with the Sports Republic situation, if that was always the case, which we more or less all knew anyway, we knew this was going to be a difficult season, and it was alluded to, they might as well have just come out and said it. Said, look, like, we came up, we weren't ready to come up, we needed a year of consolidation in the Championship. You're not going to say no to the money that comes with going up. It's going to be a bumpy ride next season. I know they alluded to it, and probably from that time, Russell Martin was always going to be on borrowed time because, as we've seen throughout, and I don't want to keep going back to him because, ultimately, I think it is part of the reason.
It's in the past as well now, though, isn't it? That's the problem.
Yeah, but it was always likely to be the case, and it's not just us. It's the same for Villa. It's the same for Leicester. They've given it a bit more of a go, but again, we've gone over the reasons that I think there's a big difference between us and them, and I do think it probably is just an attacking player or someone to score goals. Put in mind that our top goal scorer now barely got a sniff under Russell Martin, so. It's one of those. I think again, yeah, it was always going to be a tough game. I think we've just got to look at it and realise if they're bringing on a player like Donyell Marlin, who was starting for Borussia Dortmund last year as a sub, like as one of their impact players, that says what it needs to say.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
And this is where I'm a bit like with the Derby points record. Like, okay, if we end up finishing below them, we end up finishing below them. Statistically, we are the worst team in history. But that people have to understand how far the Premier League. I'm not necessarily talking about at the very top because I don't know how much better that is comparatively to what it used to be. Maybe arguably that's got slightly worse. But in general, if teams like Aston Villa in 7th, or, well, I'm not sure where Villa are now, but, teams down to, what are we saying, 15th, have got quality players in every position. Wolves have got Cunha. Palace's front three are, phenomenal. Brighton have got a good attacking forward. João Pedro, like every single team, realistically, in that top 15. And then if you come up with financial fair play, what can you do if you can't spend? The last team that were able to spend big when they came up with Forest, and since then it's almost been every team that has come up is going straight back down. So
the proper yo-yo. Like you can't, like, finding one or two good players, right? Which is basically what we've done in almost Dibbling, who's more homegrown, but like Matías Fernandes and stuff. You find one or two, but that one or two cannot carry you to Premier League safety, especially the way that it was like many years back. Like, it doesn't seem to be that can happen anymore. And you're right, financial fair play has a lot to answer for stuff like that as well. Like the fact that City can go out and spend 150 odd million in a January transfer window to then clap their hands on, like, what we would give to have 150 million, but then also it's convincing players to come here as well, because then you've got the real possibility they'll go down. And then you've just got, in general, as you pointed out, like we probably would be good for some of the players that have been here long term to leave, mainly because at this point you've just going to have, I don't know, like there's that almost stain of, especially for like Jan and Stevens and stuff. You've got the relegation. You've been relegated twice. You've come up. You want to come up again. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. It might be in a completely different way. It might be in a completely different style. But like the fear that I have is, okay, we go down, we figure out a new manager, we sort out a good start for the championship, we win the championship again. What's to stop it happening again? What is there going to be to mitigate this? And is it going to be some, it doesn't, we've already seen, realistically, it doesn't matter what manager we have in charge at this point. People talking about how role's the answer. I don't think it's that. I think it's something is going to need to change, but I wonder where that change is going to come from. And people are like, oh, look, some clubs have done it before. What about the Brentfords and the Forests? And it's like, as you pointed out, like Forest spent so much and got fined for it and like lost points. And it's like, you shouldn't have to break the rules to be able to like
to compete,
get a fair chance. That's insane. And you are going to end up with almost an established club. And, you're looking at sort of who's at the bottom of the Premier League, and you're looking at sort of like Manchester United's as well, and sort of Tottenham, which no one really expected at the beginning of the season. And the players they have, as you pointed out, how are we meant to, when our best options off the bench are, and I feel really, bad, but happy for, a sort of PL2 player, Jay Robinson, to get his debut. But that's not the same as being able to bring off like ex-Champions League players.
You would have thought it's something that they'd be trying to encourage in terms of bring that quality of player through. But the way that they've, and this is a whole nother can of worms to open that I don't think, or another rabbit hole to go down. The whole point of financial fair play is to try and level the playing field, and all it's done is made it even harder.
It's leveled the playing field for the top clubs who are making the most money to be able to spend. It's just
implemented a ceiling for these smaller clubs to actually be able to push. And it's not just in the Premier League; it's the Championship now. How a team like, I'm a team that I used to work for, a team that were down the road, and the conversation that was had there when they were in League One was, there's no point going up. This was a few years ago. There's no point going up because we will come straight back down. Like, the cash is nice, but the Championship now is obscene. The difference between the top and the bottom. Like, you look at these teams, and all that's going to happen is they're going to keep going up and coming back down and getting parachute payments, and all of a sudden the Championship's going to have the same problem, and it's just going to be. Granted, it's a bit more competitive in the bottom half, but
that's the thing. And there's a game like yesterday's. It truly shows you the differences.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are we supposed to do? Like, hope that... So realistically now, a lot of the eggs are in the basket of Spurs to try and select young players, scout players that aren't really known that end up being really good. But, like, you're going to have to do that with almost a full squad of players to be able to then get up into the Premier League and stay there. Because I don't know, if we end up with, for example, a Leeds a Burnley and a Sheffield United are all the ones that come back up next season. Are any of them staying realistically?
No, I think it'll be interesting to see Burnley because of a very aggressive defensive. Like, this is part of my criticism of the situation with Russell Martin last year. We were always a leaky team. Our defence, and
we got done over by 5-0 at least twice. Once at the beginning of the season and at the end. So
I've mentioned before about a house being built on sand. Like, it doesn't work. And Burnley will be going up with pretty much the opposite. I'll be interested to see how they get on, but I don't ultimately see them having the quality. Same with Sheffield. Leeds are probably the one. And again, it's that aggressive. It's the Ellen Rowe factor, but it's maybe the aggressive sort of counter. I can't pretend to know too much how Leeds play at the moment, but given it's usually Leeds, it's usually the sort of the rock and roll football that we were promised from Juric that never really happened. But that aggressive counter pressing. So is that the way to stay in the Premier League? Is it that playing against the ball, being defensively resolute, dogged, work hard and try and nick something and then just try desperately to stay up and then build on it and hope the three that come up the next year are the ones that go straight back down? Like, I don't know.
This is Greg's whole thing about let's bring back Big Sam is almost let's just try and put in a philosophy of football that's like win no matter what, even if it's the most horrifically boring. But the defense thing you say speaks a lot. But then all I can see at that point is, okay, they have a really rigid defense and then they get ran around the park like Villa did, and then it ends up 0-0. And then you have 30 games at 0-0, and maybe that's enough points nowadays, especially with the state of the fact that currently the bottom three are 10 with us, 18 with Leicester, 21 with Ipswich, and then a golf of that is that the next team up is West Ham United with 35. So,
all of a sudden, you then kill the quality of the league, which is the one thing they're trying to prevent. They're trying to build it.
It's ironic, isn't it? Right, we'll have a little break. We'll hear from Zencastr. When we come back, we'll closing thoughts and maybe have a look to West Ham. And here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. And we're back. So, it wasn't the dream new manager bounce that everybody wanted, right? It was probably never going to be that way, let's face it.
It was a 75-minute manager bounce.
Yeah, there you go. Classic us this season of where we've played for 65 minutes really well, and then if they scored about 4 or 5 goals in that period of time where we didn't, that's not our fault. But hopefully they learned some stuff.
Yeah, worth noting some finish from Watkins.
Oh yeah, like don't get me wrong.
To applaud.
That was such a good goal, and it was kind of like at that point you're like, that's again some of the small differences, and almost reminded me a little bit of that first Solomana goal against Swansea, where it kind of came out of nowhere, somehow managed to get it into a position and score from something that you didn't really expect it to do, but it is what it is, and. Can they take something out of that? Obviously, we're going up now against West Ham, which probably, if you look at the state of the table, is our most winnable game now up until the end of the season. Do we get something out of it at all? How do you feel after that performance coming up against West Ham? Or is it just roll the dice and see what comes out on Saturday?
All these teams have got the quality to beat us. Let's be honest about it.
I was going to say they already have, haven't they? That's the problem.
And that was our last manager bounce, and we still managed to find a way to. We lost that one, didn't we?
We did. Yes, it was Boxing Day.
Yeah. It's I was watching. I was looking on YouTube for the highlights to just have another watch back earlier, and it came up. I just put Southampton FC, and it came up all the Sky Sports highlights, and I just looked. Loss. I just looked at the scores. But I mean, again, it's one of those. Is it winnable? Yes. Do I think we could? Yes. Do I think we will? Probably not.
No.
Potter, is a good manager. They've got good quality players. The player that was our top player by a mile when we went down last time can't even get in their team. So,
yep. They won a trophy not too long ago, a European trophy, like it or not. Whether or not you think the Conference League is a tin pot, which I kind of do, a European Conference League is still a European trophy. They still won it. They still have players like Darren Bowen, and
you'd still take it.
Oh yeah, I'd take anything at this point.
Yeah,
I'll take winning a game.
I know I put it in the chat. I watched back the highlights of the JPT trophy win the other day, and I'd go back and take that. Although I believe that Peterborough did a bit of an upset today, didn't they? And Birmingham couldn't even win that, could they?
I didn't see, but
last I looked, Peterborough were winning 2-0. That's
incredible.
Yeah, Peterborough won 2-0. So Peterborough won the Johnston Paint, or whatever it's called now. Is it EFL Trophy?
It's the English Football League trophy. That's why no one will ever win the Johnson Paint trophy. If I remember rightly, it's still the one that's sponsored by Papa John's. Or maybe it's changed at this point. Who knows? Difficult to keep track of all the weird names they keep changing things to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's difficult. I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, especially where we don't have players that seem to be able to do a full 90. Like, I think the reason that Paul was taken off was injury, which means that I imagine that he's going to struggle to get into the squad. He already struggled to get into this squad, to be fair. No one thought he was going to play it. But it's just none of our players can seem to manage 90 either, which is the mad thing about it.
Again, I think that is symbolic of the way we were playing last year. It's all very well and good. I'll put my hand up and say when I'm wrong, but I said early on last season when we started off with Russell Martin's style of football, I said, this is really interesting. I will be very curious to see how it works in the Premier League, because it's all very well and good doing it against Sheffield Wednesday. It's another thing doing it against Man City. But I don't. West Ham must be seeing this as a bit of a scouting mission, right? Because it's by the sounds of things, they're going to try and buy a whole squad in the summer.
Yeah, they're the ones that want. This is the thing I think I'm most baffled by is the amount of our players that are still linked. What are they going to be like backup options? And it's probably our better players, but then that leaves us in a position where our entire squad is stripped out and they need to rebuild it, and we're basically hedging all of our bets in this one guy. But as we've said about before, is it to do the ownership? Maybe they should have probably. The problem is it's like they should have done a better job the first time round to keep us in the league, right? And it's hindsight's a wonderful thing. At this point, all they can do is deal with what's being thrown in front of them. It's just that so much has changed since then. So much water under the bridge. The landscape has changed. The amount, all the things that we've discussed so far today are all something that they've had to deal with a lot more than they would have that season.
Yeah,
and they're probably kicking themselves. But
I think that is probably the case. Like, look, people don't set up and try and do things with an intention to fail. I think there just probably needs to be a bit more clarity from them and say, look, like this is it. I know they've said it a couple of times and they've done a couple of fan forums, and a lot of it's stuff that people won't want to hear, but sometimes the truth hurts. And I actually think, I know there's been a lot of backlash about, the Saints pub and increasing prices around and, wasting money on a pub rather than buying players. But, ultimately the reason they're doing that is because they know that we need to be on a better footing financially because of PSR to be able to compete in the Premier League. So they've got to build that infrastructure first, which is why, again, I don't think they wanted or expected to be promoted this year, but you're not going to turn down,
that's what I said.
If it's available and an opportunity to improve the squad, but then there's not much point in doing it if you're then going to go up, buy a few, talented players. If we go up, buy Matty Fernandez and sell him, all right, we'll probably get a profit on him. Is it going to help us in the long term? Maybe the cash will, but it would be nice if we could add a couple that will actually stick around through the Championship and then come up again, gradually rebuild stronger and stronger every season until you can compete.
And that's the thing, is how that, and if we start going up and down, will it be parachute payments? But shout out to my friend James Peach, because we had a discussion last year and he seemed to think we had a quite early on in the season. It was like, do you think you've come up too early? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what's happened. He's like, I think you could have done with another year or two consolidating, because the dip up and down, and eventually there's going to be a loss of parachute payments as well. And just, I don't know, the lack of plan. And it's like you get lucky, and then all of a sudden it's like trying to deal with it. And then we've got rid of Russell Martin. Would we have, as you pointed out, was it the answer long term? Probably not. What else is the answer? Well, let's pick a random manager who's done well with a random team in the Championship. Oh, well, actually, no, we want a Premier League quality manager. Okay, well, which Premier League quality managers available? And like everyone, you can see it in the fandom itself, fan base itself, ripping each other apart. No, that's a stupid idea. I think this is a ridiculous idea. And ultimately, we're not going to know. We're just going to have to hope and trust that it doesn't end up in a complete shambles, because we can see what happens when it does. If you look at Luton right now, like they're potentially going back down to League One after having Premier League. You had Ross Barkley there like last season. It's nuts to think about. So I guess the note of optimism that I'll have to leave it on, or otherwise I'll get shouted at by Greg, is could be worse. somehow it could be worse. And where I'm at is that when we're at rock bottom, the only thing we can really see is it getting better. And if that means the entire squad is replaced and all of the players that come in do a better job next season, if it means that we get managers that really care, if all of a sudden we win any of the next couple of games and they give it to Rusk and Lallana, I originally thought that was an absolutely ludicrous idea. And then Greg said, in the last pod, you were talking about how you think if they do all right, it's worth giving them the job. And you start to think about, well, how should you form Premier League managers in this day and age? Because you're not going to be getting them. You're not going to be getting them. We're not going to be able to,
We do want to go and get a mercenary that's going to leave within 6 months if he does well. Like we need someone that's going to sit in and be with us for the long haul. And after a few good years, maybe it is another Hassan Hutel. Like, to be fair to him, he put everything into the club. Didn't I appreciate maybe he didn't do well enough that other clubs would maybe come sniffing. But the last thing we want, and we've been stung by it a lot recently, we keep hiring good hires. I think Jason Wilcox was good. I think Joe Shields, for the record, when he was signed, was a good acquisition. And, both of them within 6 months, Joe Shield in particular, maybe that was down to character, don't know. And Jason Wilcox have both been swept up by other top clubs. That's
historically Pochettino, Koeman.
Yeah.
I still remember that day finding out Koeman went to Everton. Everton, absolutely devastating. And club's been kind of on a downward trajectory since then, and that says it all. So I guess here's hoping for a better future. There's the positivity we'll end it on. But Oscar, mate, it's been a pleasure. Sorry that our new manager bounce to everybody was once again a loss, pretty bad loss as well. But alas, it was Aston Villa, and it turns out that I need to start learning that they're not the Aston Villa of 5 years ago. Thank you for everybody for listening. We're on all the social media as usual: Facebook, Twitter, /X, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, all the stuff that we say every episode, week in, week out. We'll be back tomorrow with something. I don't know if we want to really tactically discuss what happened. There wasn't really a huge amount, other than the 7 shots and the 2 not being on target. But if not, we'll figure something out. We usually do. I don't feel like Rusk and Lallana can get fired, so that was going to be an emergency manager episode, but there'll be something. And until then, everybody, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.